Okay, September has been the driest month. Some people in the supply teacher community are calling it the supply teacher drought. It's normal. However, things for many seem a little bit more dry than normal. September is always a dry month for supply because often schools don't need supply teachers because teachers come back from summer holidays fresh, prepared and ready to start the year ahead. I think there's also an element of budget and savings as well. Schools would be, from a business perspective, quite foolish to initially spend money on supply teachers and then throughout the remainder of the year perhaps not know where those budgets are going, especially at the moment. Just thinking about it, there's going to be backdated payments coming up because teachers will be having an increase in wages in the future too. I think it's really interesting at the moment. There was a recent report that delved into supply teacher pay and some of the different factors that were responsible for schools spending more and more money. Part of it was, one of it was to do with high paid leaders and professionals in trusts. And then supply teachers, or more specifically the agencies, got a good amount of stick in it too. And I do think for the right reasons. I think agencies at the moment charge quite a significant amount and supply teachers don't necessarily see that. I'm lucky with the agency that I'm with at the moment. I'm not really sure what they charge schools. However, they're quite fair in their payments and they're also good with communicating back. But from the experience of myself and my wife when we were looking at different agencies to start off with, the pay that some schools, some supply agencies offer, and then the structure through different umbrella schemes and all sorts of things like that was a little bit crazy. And it's certainly something to look out for. This is something that I discuss more in depth in my supply teacher first impressions video to be something that you're wary of. So what can you do if you are, like me, a supply teacher? I'm privileged. I'm privileged because supply teaching isn't my main job. It's something that I do because I love teaching, I still want to have a foot in the door, and I want to be able to explore a range of different schools to be able to see what schools are right for me and hopefully in the future apply to those schools to receive some sort of part-time job once I've built a relationship with those schools. That's my goal. However, for other teachers, whether they're just coming off the back of maternity or whether they're just looking for something a little bit more flexible, 5 days a week on supply or on that supply rota is something that could be quite scary at the moment. I've now not taught for, what would it be? Since the end of June? July, August, September, could be close to 3 months since I, last taught in a classroom, which definitely is a little bit of a scary one. I did have my agency say last week, supply started to pick up, so, expect a call and things like that, but that was last week. So last Monday, Tuesday, this Monday, Tuesday, I've just literally not heard anything, which is definitely quite interesting. Whiteboard time. At the moment, if you're in an agency of some sort, a lot of the schools that I'm on about, the trusts, have to go to an agency. So my biggest tip for you is to not just prioritize one agency. I think for myself, if this continues, I am going to look, even though it's not something that I need to do, I am going to look at different agencies because even though it's not something that I need to do, I do want to teach. And if I'm hearing absolutely nothing and no opportunities coming my way, I need to know about that. So often with trusts, and supply, you have A, B, and we're going to do the same, A, B. We'll throw another letter in, C. What sometimes happens, I'm with an agency that's quite expansive in a range of different areas in my local area, so different towns. Some trusts have a dependency, or they will be signed up and they can only go through that agency for their supply. So for example, let's say Trust A, they can only go to Trust A. Trust B, they might be a bit more flexible. They can go to this one and this one. But then C can only go to this one. However, let's say I'm part of A. I might be getting schools A and B come to me, but I might not be getting C, which is a little bit of a concern. Equally, if I'm in supply agency B, I might just be getting that one school over and over. This happens for a number of different reasons. Schools build up a relationship with different agencies. They know that they can go to those schools, call them up, and they will put someone reliable in front of them who can teach the class. And it all comes down to that, but it also comes down to contractual basis. So my number one tip would be, if you're a supply teacher, to not just have one agency, but to also have another one. So all of a sudden, you're opening up your options to how many schools are available. Just by signing up to another agency, you might have then, let's say these trusts have 5 schools, 10 schools, 6 schools. Just by signing up to another agency, you've suddenly doubled your amount of schools that you can sign up to. That's the one tip that I would mention. I think the problem with agencies is the fact that, yes, they can charge the money that they do, and then the supply teachers don't necessarily see it. But it's not their fault. It's actually not their fault. The biggest fault I think, is of the local councils, the local governments, council I think is the right term to use, who don't have a centralised supply teacher system. A lot of schools nowadays, they are going through a process of maybe having a hill to run for one day a week, and if they're able to cover additional days that week, they can do so. So, or I might have an additional qualified teacher who only does one day a week, but they might be able to cover additional days a week. That makes a lot more sense. Because, 0 hours contract, unless you're an agency worker like we are at the moment as supply teachers, it's not meant to be a thing. But yeah, working one day a week and then maybe getting an additional day here or there makes a lot more sense for schools. It's a lot more financially viable. They're not paying, they'll pay a teacher this, the teacher gets that. They're not then paying an agency pays the more money, and then the teacher gets a little bit. Really what needs to happen is local councils need to have their own centralised system of supply teachers. That's the thing that makes sense, because if that happens, then a school would be able to phone up the local establishment, the local agency. We're not on about agency. They'd be able to call up that local centralised area, say that they need to have supply XYZ, and that way it's distributed out fairly and also evenly. It's exactly the same as what we used to have when I was a lifeguard. There would be that central pool of lifeguards who were part-time, and you would get a phone call, or you might not get a phone call, but they haven't got to go to an agency and say, oh, can we call up this person and we're going to pay the agency this and the lifeguard will get this. It's just not something that happens, but it's something that's really, really interesting. Ultimately, I think it's one of those things. Some supply teachers in some areas feel that they're getting more work. I definitely am not of that opinion. I didn't do supply teaching last year, but it's definitely a lot quieter than at the end of last year. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one, but I know that for some people this is a really interesting time of year, and yeah, certainly for me it's an interesting one, and hopefully things start to pick up. But that would be my top tip, is to look at other agencies, and then also develop relationships with other schools, because not every school uses a supply agency if you can do that. So hope this video has been useful. Certainly interesting to talk about some of the different droughts in supply, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Until then, I'm out.